Ryan,
Tony, and Crystal.
We can't guarantee that you're gonna look great, but if you wanna stay in shape, well, you better hit the Gymwits. That's right, man. Tell 'em.
welcome to the Gymwits podcast. I'm Ryan George.
I'm Justin Guild, aka Chef Sonic.
And we are the Gymwits. So I'm getting concerned. It's getting cold. And,
I know, right?
You know,
I know,
it's
it
funny
is
every year. That's why, like, I always add the caveat when if I complain about the heat, like, I'll take this over the cold weather because,
Sure.
you know, it's like this morning was sweater weather.
Yep, that's it.
And
It only gets
especially
worse from here
now
on.
more than ever because like I'm exercising outdoors almost
Yep.
exclusively.
That's it.
So
Done.
it's like I'm really now more anxious than ever that it's gonna be cold, and I don't know. I mean, their gyms are open, so I'll figure it out. But I'd rather not, I'd rather avoid spending time in the gym if I can. And
Of course.
I kind of like working out outdoors,
Yeah,
especially
no,
in a mask.
I
Have you worked out with the mask on yet?
No, I haven't.
Oh, it sucks. It's miserable.
Oh, it's terrible. I know.
Like
It's not
especially
fun.
any kind of cardio with the mask is just absolutely brutal. So yeah.
You should make a mask that has more breathing, capabilities.
Yeah, it's not kind of hard.
So
Like, you
another
should-
thing that's coming are the elections are obviously there, and we're not going to see a traditional debate
Yeah.
like we normally would, right? Because
Yeah.
obviously that's just not going to happen. And debates are always a little bit are a little funky anyway because they don't always ask the hard
They
hitting
kind of
questions.
suck.
They kind of suck. But what
Yeah.
if what was being discussed was a Joe Rogan
Oh, you
moderated
heard about
debate?
the Tim
Yeah.
Kennedy yeah.
What would you think about that? Yeah, because and
I
Trump
so-
said he would do it.
Okay, yeah. So here's I don't know that a debate would work because I don't know how Rogan is as like a moderator for
You
a
think
debate.
he would be fair? Like
No, it's not about being fair. It's about like, hold on a second. Shit, dog. Amelie, relax. All right, you're gonna have to edit that. Weird. Yeah, no, it's not about being fair. It's more that like when you're moderating a debate, it's like you have to stop people from speaking, too long or staying on message or staying, answering the actual questions. So where I think Rogan works, like with this podcast, I think I will listen based on the interview subject, but often like it's kind of hard to listen to regularly because he kind of talks about the same things. You kind of know what his agenda is generally, and he kind of sorry, hold on a second. Amelie. Hey, stop. Stop. Sorry, it's my crazy dog being crazy. Okay, let me see. Yeah, so no, it's not about Rogan being fair or not. It's more that he, moderating a debate is kind of a skill in itself because you're stopping people from going over, making sure people stay, answer the actual questions. And not that moderators on CNN or MSNBC or whatever do that well to begin with, but I just don't see, outside of the shock factor, I don't know that a Joe Rogan moderated debate would be good. But what I wouldn't mind would be just a long form, what he normally does on his podcast. Because I think with the right interview subject, he does a pretty good job. I've seen people say he doesn't ask hard hitting questions and whatnot, but like he does a pretty good job of asking the questions that like the average person is going to want to know, and he'll push back on things, and he tries to. It seems like he's always trying to get an understanding of what the person's talking about. So I wouldn't mind actually seeing him interview each. I mean, look, at the end of the day, very few people are undecided about this election. It's like I'm shocked that there are that many that are, but most of us kind of know what we're going to do or which direction we're going. But I still think it would be worth it to see him go
Which evil we're going to vote for.
Yeah. Well, see, I'm always like I think there are two problems with that. One problem is it makes kind of a bit of a false equivalency. Like if it, unless you genuinely think both are evil, it's like it's a bit of a false
More of a
equivalency.
figurative sort of thing.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, nobody trusts. Like I think modern politicians are almost all, with a few exceptions, narcissists and self-interested, and have their own kind of corporate agenda, or corporate teats that they have to feed off of, whatever. So, I feel like I don't really trust many of them, and I think that they're really often in it for themselves. But you have different levels where, where some I think are very obviously only out for themselves, and others, at least you think maybe somewhat decent people. But I still think you run into this problem if you just make it a false equivalency, because then you make people apathetic about actually voting. And so you have a situation now where I do think, like, you have one person who I didn't vote. It wasn't, I didn't vote for Biden. Biden wasn't my second, third, fourth, or fifth choice probably among the Democratic nominees, but he's still far better than Trump. And I think Trump, to me, is an existential threat to our democracy. Yeah. So I think the threat, in this case where you have, quote, two evils, it's not like if Republicans had ran like Romney or someone similar, then it's like, all right, you know what? Like, is Romney that much different from Biden? Probably not. Biden's a little more socially liberal, but like, they're mostly the same. One center left, the other one's on the right, maybe a little bit more, not even center left, like Biden's kind of right down the center. But like in this case, it's like, I think Trump's like a threat that needs to be taken out of the office, and by any means. So I think that in that case, saying it's two evils, I think then leads to some apathy, which I think we got last time around. So,
all right,
my opinion, but
yeah, no, makes perfect sense.
Yeah,
anyhow, so what do we have on the agenda for today?
Yeah, so what do we have on the agenda today? Yeah, now that we got the politics out of the way, so we have actually an interesting interview. So obviously, COVID-19 has dominated has just dominated everything.
And about that, and I'm in Nashville now,
yeah.
And our mayor is being called the De Blasio of the South. So,
why is that?
Well, he did some shady things. Like he held back information that or supposedly so. Hold on one sec. I'm gonna cut that again. See, you fucked me up. So no, fuck you. So yeah. See, now I don't even know where to. No,
we'll just do it again. Say he's being called the De Blasio of the South.
So yeah. And speaking of COVID, the mayor of Nashville is now being referred to as the De Blasio of the South. And supposedly he held back information about COVID, about the lack of transmission in bars and stuff like that, so that he could keep bars and restaurants closed, shut down. So I got to do my research on that. Okay. But supposedly he's being called that. And
it's weird.
Which is I actually find pretty hilarious.
Yeah. Well, yeah. No, we're gonna see. The next month is gonna be interesting, because like so we're recording a little bit before the interview or after the interview we did, but as we record right now, schools are opening up next week, so it's going to be an interesting time to see, how that debacle, because I'm still, like I've talked about it before, I'm not convinced that this is going to go well, and just with what I'm hearing from teachers about how things are set up, it's sounding like it's just going to be a nightmare from the get-go.
Yeah,
so
I think so.
I'd be shocked if like schools aren't closed up again by November. But the city, it's crazy, because in some ways the city's been amazing. Like we've handled it, considering where we were in March and April, like we've handled it brilliantly. But like it just seems like we're heading for that second wave in a few weeks.
Yeah, it's coming.
All right. Well, yeah. Anyway, so as I was saying, so with COVID's been a big deal, and so we actually have a doctor who has worked with patients, and kind of can give us maybe some insight into how things have been, how things were during especially during the height of it, and maybe share some advice for people who are looking maybe to avoid it or what to do if you get it. So we have a great interview, a lot of interesting questions, and hope you enjoyed it. It was Dr. Mark Cucuzella. I think I got the name right. But yeah, without further ado, check out the interview.
Hey everyone, we are here with Dr. Mark Cucuzella. Hey Mark, how's everything?
Oh, everything's good.
Dr. Cucuzella is a professor at West Virginia School of Medicine, so this is going to be very exciting. How are things down in? Are you down in West Virginia? You mentioned that.
Yeah, I'm part of West Virginia University. I live in Shepherdstown, West Virginia, which is on the very eastern side. So West Virginia has a weird shape to it. We have two panhandles, and I'm on the eastern panhandle. It's actually not too far from Baltimore or Washington, D.C. It's closer there than our own state capital, which would take me about 4.5 hours over, single lane country roads to get there.
Nice. I just drove through West Virginia yesterday. Oh, no.
Oh, wow.
Yes, it was yesterday and stuff. I've done a lot of driving. I drove from Nashville to New York, so West Virginia is part of the route. It's pretty. I wish I got a chance get a chance to see a little bit more than just the highway, though.
Oh, yeah, get off and look at the rivers. We've got some amazing rafting here, some of the best mountain biking, hiking, outdoor experience are not crowded. So if you like social distancing, come to West Virginia.
There you go.
We're social distance by nature. Broke away from the Confederacy in 1864. So.
That's it. That's how you do it.
So whenever we start our podcast, like obviously we have a lot of really interesting discussion for today, but we always like to get an idea of your own fitness journey. So if you can give us a little bit of your own background, like do you play sports? Do you exercise? Like what's fitness to you, and how do you kind of interact with it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll give you the short version, but I actually wrote a book called Run for Your Life, published by Alfred Knopf 2 years ago. So my background in the military and in sports is I was a track runner all through school, ran at University of Virginia, ran cross country and track in college, and we didn't know anything about anything, so had like every running injury known to man, including bleeding ulcers from all the non-steroidal anti-inflammatories they gave us for our injuries. And the kind of mantra then was just break your body, and that's kind of how we all, work as hard as you can until you break, heal, repeat. And it got me interested in medicine. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I entered college, but I was hurt so much. I started hanging out with this very kind of eccentric sports physician named Dr. Daniel Couland, who has also published a couple textbooks, but he was a real innovator in running medicine. Like he would take an hour with you and do things like gait analysis. It's like, wow, imagine that. Watch how you run and move, not just inject something. So I started shadowing him as like a third, fourth year student in college, junior, senior in college, and I got interested in medicine. Got me to apply to medical school. Didn't have any money for medical school, so I saw this little flyer in the elevator. Don't have money for med school. Join the Air Force, and we'll pay for your school. So I went that route. I applied for a military scholarship, so they covered my medical school tuition. And that led to a life kind of, I do family medicine, flight medicine, which is kind of air crew operational stuff. So I dealt a lot with young active duty troops, having injuries, sports injuries. I'd pretty much sworn off competitive running until I got to med school, and I realized that I did better in school when I ran. So, I probably, going back to my childhood, I probably did have unmedicated AD. My parents just opened the door, and we would play like 4 to 6 mile games of tag in the backyard. And so I started running again just for the pure joy of running. And as a former competitor, when you start running, you got to like line up for a race. So I lined up, ran the Marine Corps Marathon my first year of med school, really not trained at all in the standard way that I would think of training. And I ended up running like a 2:34, pretty decent time. And that kind of got the bug of running marathons in me, because I was like a distance guy, ran 10K cross country. So just started running marathons a couple times a year, run about 30 Boston marathons, a bunch of Marine Corps marathons in New York, just kept running these marathons. And the Air Force had a competitive team, so that was fun. So I kept my competitive juices running for the Air Force. They had what's called all Air Force teams. So amongst the troops, we go travel and compete internationally. We compete with the other branches of the services, and that was kind of like my tribe. So, you go and travel with your team. So it kept me young, kept me playing, kept me competing. About year 2000, I was trying to qualify for the Olympic trials marathon. Got pretty close. Needed a 222, ran a couple 224s, but I was constantly hurt. The main injury I had was an injury to my foot, both feet, which was structural. I'd squeezed into track spikes so long, my big toe was bent in at about a 45-degree angle. So I ended up, aborting that, coming a couple minutes from doing it. And again, had operation, almost had sworn off running again because, the doc's opinion was, well, look at what it's done to you. It's kind of broken your skeleton, so don't run. And again, after a couple months off running after surgery, I missed running again. So I started to jog gently around my park in Denver, and then started to take my shoes off, just started to feel the ground. There was a kind of a trend about running form and minimal running. So I started to dip into that. Again, I brought my running back, and knock on wood, that was 20 years ago. That was my last running injury, was at that time, but got me inspired to get back into competing again, because I found now that my foot worked again, I could run pretty well again, and started to teach for the Air Force. So I've developed a lot of curriculum for the U.S. Air Force. I'm actually flying to Portland this weekend to do some Air Force training, because they have to pass a fitness test. If in the military you can't run, unfortunately, unless you have really a legitimate medical waiver, you're discharged. I could imagine going into my hospital now and applying a fitness test standard to my hospital staff. We would lose like all the critical staff. So that was a lot of fun. Spent a lot of time just traveling around, listening to people, talking to people, learning from, just like patients, learning from active duty members about what are their barriers to fitness. That's how I got into nutrition. I had a 6-month assignment to help redesign the running program, and I realized BMI was really the driver of it. And in medical school, all I had learned was, eat less and exercise more. That's how you lose weight. But I never saw that work in my clinical practice. But with 6 months assignment, I actually got to dig deep into that, and came across a couple things by Gary Taubes. He was an early writer of this. There's an article called "Maybe It's All Been a Big Fat Lie," which really changed my world, because it led me to read his book, which was called "Good Calories, Bad Calories." This is about 2012. Not much written about low carbohydrate diets, but basically it was a 450-page scientific tome on the history and politics of nutrition. And I'd start travel to Air Force bases and ask people, anyone in the room lost 50 pounds and kept it off? And this was the response. I went to 40 or 50 bases, all over the world traveling. Maybe one hand would go up. I said, "What did you do?" And across the board, it was a different language of a similar theme, because no one was talking like LCHF or keto. They'd say, "Well, I got rid of all the sugar." "Well, I did paleo." And at that time, paleo was not like junk food paleo. It was basically eating vegetables, maybe some fish on the side, and maybe some full-fat dairy. And occasionally I'd have someone have the guts to say this. It's usually a dude. They're pretty gutsy. They raise their hand and kind of like, if there was a doctor, I thought I was going to yell at them. They would say this, "Well, I did this thing called Atkins." And they'd say it, "I did Atkins." There was this kind of bro science world of, you need to lose weight, get rid of the carbs, just go low carb. And Gary Taubes' work really validated that. And obviously since 2012, it's taken off. And at the same time, I was diagnosed with a type of diabetes called maturity onset diabetes of youth. So a problem of not making enough insulin. So I was actually nearly medically discharged for diabetes. So I did hard lockdown in 2012 of carbohydrates, my own life. I was a runner, right? So I thought, oh gosh, I was eating cereal like 6 times a day, because that's what I thought. So that I went complete food pyramid upside down in a matter of a couple weeks. And now I feel great. So I've been on low carb diet now for 8 years, still run marathons, ultra marathons. So that's kind of the short story. Teach a lot of people, individualizing therapy, have a medical practice designated, reducing medication and type 2 diabetes and obesity through low carbohydrate diets. It is a massively powerful medical intervention for the right group.
So, yeah. Oh, yeah. You ask Justin. Yeah.
And I was going to say, and we could definitely do 2 interviews based on on
You can
all
go on
the
any of
diet and
those.
nutrition stuff, or the fit, or are people
running.
fit
Yeah, like
enough,
one
or
of
the
like
running? That's three different.
Yeah.
It's three different ones. But right, yeah.
It'll kill
Yeah.
you, right?
So I
We
was
already
gonna
talked
ask
about COVID, right?
yeah.
I think barefoot running maybe
So,
not
yeah.
with COVID, but the metabolic stuff and the
Yeah.
low carb diets is massively engaged with COVID. Right?
Yeah. So yeah, we definitely have to have you on again just to talk about this other stuff. So let's so I was gonna ask this later, but it ties into the running. So I'll ask now, and it does tie into COVID. So obviously, you know, with especially in a bigger city like New York, we've had a massive lockdown. You're really hard to go into gyms. I think a lot of people are going to be afraid to go into gyms, and so there has been, you know, push for outdoor training. How, you know, for someone who is a runner, and with running being, you know, one of the things you can, you know, almost anybody can do outdoors. You know, how safe is it to do it outdoors? Are there kind of, what are best practices for runners? Does wearing a mask affect you? You know, kind of what have you experienced as somebody who's an expert on running and also is dealing with COVID?
Short story there. For what we know about COVID, and everything any of us says about COVID has error bars, right?
Yeah.
Every day there's something. The safest place to be is outside, period. So yes, the safest place to be is outside, preferably not at a party with a bunch of other 20-somethings sharing margarita shots, right?
Yeah.
So that's not outside, that's gathering. So
Yeah.
we've hosted 3 running camps this summer, you know, and kids, right? Youth, space kids out. They are so grateful just to see other kids. So that's physical distancing, not social distancing. So we're doing group runs here. You know, we're not hugging each other and kissing each other. We go on a trail, we're spread out. Airborne transmission outside while you're moving in open air, sunshine, wind. There hasn't been case reports of this. You know, it's almost non-existent. So if you look at the most unsafe place is, unfortunately, it's poverty inside, you know, communities of color. And I've written articles about this where you have 10 people living in a single bedroom apartment, you know, with a window air conditioning unit, and one of them's going to a high risk job. You know, maybe they're working at a hospital, working at a grocery store. So those are the riskiest scenarios. It's indoor transmission because no one's wearing the masks inside. But outdoor, whether you're just walking in the park, you're at Central Park, you know, doing a gym workout, doing a CrossFit workout outside on park benches, you know, as long as you're safely distanced from people, that is the safest place to be. And the best thing about that, you know, Ryan, Justin, Tony, is because this is protecting your host. So if your host is healthy, that's you, your odds of getting coronavirus is lower. So you can hide from the virus, or you can protect the host, meaning get yourself well and healthy. And that's the opportunity now, because this is the COVID marathon, so to speak. All right, so we know this is not going away. The marathon's 26 miles, and I would guess, meaning, you know, error bars. I don't know. Maybe you guys chime in. Maybe we're at mile 2. What do you think?
Yeah,
it seems like it. I think.
Yeah. I think maybe mile 2, at best.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think
Maybe
you
3. So maybe 1.
Yeah. No, it
Take
seems
care of your
early.
host. Get your shit in gear, right?
Well, now, so I guess getting to that, so what, you know, I guess that's the challenge, because I think what can you do to protect the host? Like, what are some, you know, best practices for that? Like, how do we manage that? Because it does seem like, you know, you don't want to say it's inevitable that, you know, everyone's going to get it, but, you know, we're still looking at, you know, if the, you know, especially here where it seems like, you know, states and cities are really trying to get things going on some level while managing it, and you know, before we don't have a vaccine, and even when we do, it's probably going to take a while for, you know, for kind of herd immunity from it. What can you do to protect the host?
Yeah, and this really doesn't have a whole lot to do with athletics, right? And so, you know, I've partnered with Atkins for some initiatives just trying to help people's metabolic health. And the number one lowest hanging fruit is get rid of sugar in your diet. You know, so the World Health Organization recommends maybe 6 teaspoons of sugar is the most you would ever apply to a living human being, less in children, and 1 carton of chocolate milk, which we give to kids in school per the U.S. dietary guidelines, allowed. You know, kids get free school lunch, has 6 to 7 teaspoons just in that 1 carton of chocolate milk, which they have 2 a day. So all the processed refined carbohydrates, which we would call junk food. Most people kind of know what that is, stuff in bags. So if you get rid of that, you're going to improve your metabolic health, because we know that insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes, you know, these are the comorbidities, obesity, that increase your odds of ending up in the ICU with COVID. So right now there's a lot of cases going on, but a lot of these are in well people that really have no symptoms. That probably are carrying some fragment of the virus in their nasal pharynx. But we don't really know does that really mean anything to you or anyone else out there. But we know that if you as an individual have these comorbidities and you are exposed to COVID, your innate and adaptive response is off, your cytokine storm, so these markers, these just processes that happen when exposed to a virus, kind of like a little fire in the fireplace versus houses on fire. So I wrote an article on this, just a multitude of different pathways that if you have insulin resistance, it'll go haywire. So food is really key, but other things too. So sleep, trying to get, maybe some of us are getting more sleep now. Like I probably am, because I don't have to get my kids up for school. They're virtualing it. So yeah, it actually gives an hour back in the day. In the morning. So some of you are not driving 2 hours to work. So use that to your advantage for sleep and exercise. Stress reduction, important. And then, your podcast focuses on movement, so that any movement, right? Preferably outside, you get that vitamin D too. So movement, old school movement, just walking places, park your car, walk now because it's safer outside. Don't take public tram, just walk especially if you live in New York City, just put on your walking shoes and huff it. But those are some key things. But each individual needs to know where their weak spot is, right? Train for your weakness. Gosh, I'm eating junk food. I have diabetes. Food's the big rock. Okay, I've been a desk jockey for the last 5 years and I'm completely out of shape. Maybe I need to, go to the outdoor gym, which could be just, chopping wood in your backyard if you live in West Virginia. So our state's like a big outdoor gym, kind of farm fit.
So you're saying basically making yourself as healthy as possible is the best treatment. But that sounds logical, and it's something that I think we've been on the Gym Wits that we've been preaching for years, just in general, for a healthier quality of life, and it just being in better overall health just is going to help with everything, right? It's never a negative. But so I'm wondering about the treatment, because this is something that's a bit of a mystery to most of us, is about medical treatments. Is there treatment right now? Like if you are going to a hospital, if you're going to an intensive care, right? What happens when you go in? Is there any treatment? Do you? I know you hear about people being hooked up to a respirator, which seems like a terrible punishment for someone. But what happens if you are brought into do you have to go to a hospital, or are there also some other treatments that people might take at home if they are diagnosed with with COVID?
Yeah, so the best treatment is prevention, of course, so the more well you are. But if you actually are admitted and you're super sick, there's, again, the evidence is all over the place. But early use of hydroxychloroquine probably has some efficacy, unless you have a heart arrhythmic condition. So no kidding, if I was, for some reason, about ready to kind of go down the tubes with COVID, I probably would take it. Again, there'd probably be no downside for me as an individual on that high dose steroid controversy, because steroid's an immune suppressor, but it can also kind of suppress the cytokine storm. So that's kind of plus minus. Certainly oxygen, avoid being on a ventilator. So high flow oxygen, there's really no downside to that. Standard ICU management of fluids, electrolytes, get your sugars under really good control. So we know there's been a couple really good articles, and this happens with any I work intensive care here at my hospital. So if people have erratic blood sugars, highs and lows, and their sugars aren't well controlled, their outcomes are worse because multitude of complications can happen. So if you hit the hospital and you have diabetes, certainly don't be drinking the soda at your hospital. We actually got rid of all soda at my hospital here, all sugar sweetened drinks for patients, staff, visitors. We're one of the few hospitals that made that initiative, because that's something that would be kind of a toxin if you have COVID, a sugar boost, something like that. Someone says it's the protein drink, but it's got 50 grams of carbohydrate. If you have a low carb shake, with no added sugar, say you had like an Atkins shake or Another one is Ensure Protein Max, which no sugar in it. You just have one of these non-sugar shakes if you just need some protein, but you just can't eat for some reason. But get rid of the sugar. Be another treatment, meaning a toxin could affect you negatively.
So you mentioned hydroxychloroquine, and that's been, I guess, pretty controversial over the last, the last few months. So, what about some of the research that shows it either, potentially causing harm? Like, how do you, what have you, what do you know about it? And as far as what, I guess, your experience with treating people, but also, what about the kind of conflicting research about its efficacy and whether or not it's actually safe for some people?
Yeah, so efficacy. So again, look up the articles. So there's articles pointing to favor of it and those saying no efficacy. Yeah. So right now, if you're otherwise pretty well, don't have a heart arrhythmia condition, and you're in a hospital that can monitor that, my hypothesis would be go ahead and use it. But again, you're going to have that debate with people. I think there's very little downside to it, if you're using it early.
So perhaps this isn't your expertise, but maybe you could speak a little bit on it if you feel comfortable with that. I've heard some people saying, why isn't there a vaccine? How hard is it to make a vaccine for this? Why is it going to take so long? If you maybe speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, and that's a great question too. So it's go back to polio, where the whole country is triple down, right? March of dimes, every single person donating every nickel and dime they had to this cause. You're looking at 4 to 5 years. So I think it's probably a little too optimistic to think in 6 months, 12 months, we're going to have a vaccine that's going to be efficacious for the risky, meaning that we're not testing this vaccine yet on people with diabetes, metabolic disease, heart disease. Is a vaccine going to take the same in those people as 20-somethings who are volunteering, phase 2 trials, maybe phase 3 going on now. So, and then does the vaccine provide a longer term immunity to this? So I think there's a lot we're going to learn, but it's not going to be a slam dunk in 6 months. And then supply. So think you need to vaccinate the entire planet. So this is going to be an economic equation too, plus a production equation. Who can depending on the technology and what type of vaccine it is. So again, going back, until that happens, protect the host, which is you. I'm optimistic that we will have some vaccine, but we're not going to know probably a couple years into using it how efficacious it is, meaning is it effective and does it have downsides? So 1% side effect in college kids testing it, but then I go to the nursing home and give it, and oh wow, totally different clientele, and they're the ones who really get sick and die of COVID. So the people that the college football team now that has a couple cases, I'm not worried about them. They don't even know they have it, right? They're just getting screened. Yeah. So this group, I'm not that concerned about. Now, if they're going home to live with grandma, maybe, but if they're just living in their dorm, it's probably all fine. But interacting with a vulnerable population, which in our country, Justin, and unfortunately, 3/4, 2/3, whatever number you want to look at, is overweight, obese. So that right there is not a small minority of people. So there's a large group of vulnerable people out there.
So there's that chance that introducing a vaccine could almost cause more harm. I know that we've heard that debate.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know yet. So if the vaccine, so say you have a vaccine to provide protection for something that has very little odds of killing you, but the vaccine itself kills 2% of people. You're like, okay, maybe that's not a good trade-off. Yeah. Maybe I can just protect the care home, right? Don't use masks, wash hands, maybe that layer of, it's like a Swiss cheese, right? You wash your hands, you wear a mask, keep people somewhat isolated. If COVID's circulating highly, like states like Florida and Georgia now, you would like double down to protect the care home. You're in New York, right? So New York, the cases, I think there were a couple of days there were like no new cases in New York. So now you could probably go visit grandma in the care home and not feel like, I'm going to bring this in. There's a lot of that fear, people afraid to visit their grandparents, but that's going to be state by state, county by county, based on the prevalence of the virus, that you could be asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic. If your circulation is near zero, your odds of bringing this in anywhere is near zero. If it's 20%, some counties in Florida, look at those maps, and it's like dark red. Those are the areas that schools can be a little more risky. Not so much to the kids in school, but to the teachers and people that are living with them at home.
Yeah. So now, I guess an interesting thing. So you mentioned earlier, kind of that, I forget the wording, but basically like the information on this is kind of fluid. Like we're always getting new information, and there's no, I think it's interesting because like people are witnessing science being done in real time. We're often, in a way that we don't see it. And so things are constantly changing. We get new information. One thing is it works, then it doesn't work. Initially it was like wash your hands, and now it's not as much washing. I mean, not that you shouldn't wash your hands, but it seems that wearing masks is and everybody wear, kind of need everybody to wear a mask, and things just constantly change. And so for the average person who maybe isn't super most people aren't really scientifically literate, because it's not your job and you have other things to do. But how should the average person kind of manage the constantly changing information? And what are some of the best ways for somebody to kind of figure out what's right, what's not, what should I be paying attention to? How should I, critically, look at what's coming in, because there's so much thing, and even, not getting political, but it's become politicized in a lot of ways. So how do you kind of fight all of that, all of that information and what's coming in order to kind of make the best choices for yourself?
Yeah, it's a powerful question because there's a lot of fear. The media drives a lot of the fear, and a lot of misinformation. So I think if a media headline says, an article says this, you have to go read the article. This is what we do with our medical students. There was an article like last week about, those buff masks, or just, your face masks, saying that they're not useful. And the study didn't even look at that, and it wasn't a double layer. It wasn't looking at any disease transmission. It was basically looking at a method for testing aerosolized particles. But then the media catches something. So if you're a writer and you have a headline that's catchy or controversial, your article is going to get, what do you call it, little hits on the internet, and maybe you get a little more freelance dollars. But certainly a lot of the information coming out of Washington is very filtered. So gosh, February, we don't need to worry about this. It's going to go. And this was coming from the CDC and medical authorities. Public health, the Department of Public Health. The Surgeon General. You don't need to wear masks. So again, I think we all just need to be extremely humble about everything we say, everything we listen to has error bars. So it comes back down to the things that I think are safely true are protect yourself, get healthy, do the common sense things to protect yourself and the loved ones around you, which is wear a mask. There's no downside. The things that have very little downside, like Justin saying, we've been preaching about just get your body healthy. I mean, there's no downside to eating real food, not eating junk food, getting outside and exercising, getting sleep, trying to reduce your stress, but there's huge economic stress now if you've lost your job. Just follow. I think if someone has something that's dramatically different from common sense, then, be careful there too.
Common sense. Often said that common sense is not always that common.
Mark Twain. That's again, I'm just like, we started here. I own a little running store, and we started giving out masks free to the community, like in late March, because it was just the right thing to do, even before the CDC and all. It's like, well, there's no downside to this.
Yeah.
When you put up a little clothesline outside my store, if you make masks, you can donate them. If you want to take one, take them, just to kind of, let people just feel. There were a lot of people at that time wanting to do something. They're sitting at home. They have maybe some sewing skills, and they like, can I do something for the community? And it's like, yeah, make masks. We'll hang them up outside our store. Then people can come grab one. We've probably given away 200-300 masks that way.
So here's something that's been legitimately worrying me. We're now in August, which means we're getting dangerously close to storm season. And as it always does, there's going to be hurricanes. There's going to be things that hit the U.S. And what can we do to mitigate some really potentially terrible things that could happen if, say, a bad storm hits Florida and you have to have mass exodus, as we've seen in the last few years, where people have to evacuate, and you're getting lots of people perhaps need to be housed in shelters like It's a
Yeah.
terrible, you know,
Perfect
but it's
storm.
going to happen. It's going to happen.
Happening in California right
It's
now.
happening in California. Yes.
Right now
So
in
like,
California.
I
right
mean, I know it's you know,
everything has a trade-off, right? So my house burned down, you know, or I need to protect myself from fire, which is probably a little more of a short-term risk to you than COVID, especially if you're well. I mean, go camp outside, right? If the weather's fine, you know, don't go into the school
Yeah, yeah.
gymnasium with 300 other people. But again, apply the same, do the best you can in the situation you're presented with. It's huge stress. Yeah. So, you know, I'm not sure what they're doing in California. You could probably look that up, you know, in the New York Times today. You know, are they setting up, you know, kind of camps for people? Like I trained at Travis Air Force Base, which is right outside of Vacaville. And I'm looking at pictures of where I used to I lived there, right? And it's like, holy cow, I-80, and there's like flames and and it's like crazy. And fire's hopping I-80, massive highway in California. I think that whole town got evacuated. So probably the hospital I worked at, the Air Force Base, is probably setting up some kind of shelter there, because military bases tend to be, you know, kind of good open space, safe haven. But the weather's good, you know, camp people outside. You know, luckily it's summertime, maybe you can, but it's 130 degrees in some places in California right now.
Yeah.
So maybe not there.
So I have a question. I mean, I don't know how much this is something you can speak towards, or you know, if your expertise lies in here. But I guess even just your opinion as somebody who's dealt, you know, directly with COVID. What is your opinion on kind of schools reopening, especially in a city, you know, in a larger city like New York? I think that's been the big debate, because we're doing really well, all things considered, especially with how bad things were not too long ago. But it's kind of my fear. My wife's a teacher, and, you know, her fear that when schools open up, it could present a massive problem, and we could see that second wave that we've been able to avoid. Like, I guess, what's your, you know, what are your thoughts? Do you have any on whether, you know, is it the risk reward for it, whether it's worth it, whether it's worth it to just wait until, you know, give it a little bit longer? Yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, it's a great question. And again, this is where individual informed, it's like when I talk to patients, it's called shared decision making and informed decision making. So it's kind of like maybe a speed limit, you know, kind of letting off the brakes a bit. So if the speed limit was 5 miles an hour, we'd have no auto accidents, right? There'd be zero auto mortality. Probably pretty close to zero. Maybe someone go into a ditch or something.
You just have a lot of road rage, though.
Yeah, a lot of road rage. Yeah, so again, that's the downside, right? But you wouldn't get any food, right? Or you couldn't get to work. And if you know, set it at 100 miles an hour, you know, things are going to go off the rails, maybe the other direction. So each person has to set that for themselves. So in our community now in West Virginia, parents of school age kids are offered the two options. So I agree. We need to get kids back in school. They're not the ones who are going to end up in the ICU for the most part. I mean, I think this year there's maybe 90 coronavirus deaths in children. Now that's a real 90, right? So if that's your kid, that's huge, right? But influenza last winter had about 200 pediatric deaths. So, I mean, automobile wrecks. So kids drown in the summer. So there is some risk, but the risk of a child contracting this and ending up in the ICU is low. It's not zero. But no kidding, these kids are having depression. You know, they're getting, but the kids who have no internet connection, you know, no food in the home, these kids are getting behind. So it's probably, if the longer this goes out, it's going to create a bigger kind of dichotomy of the kids with means and the kids with some privilege and those who are already starting in their own end zone, because those kids are going to fall further and further behind. Younger kids, I can't imagine, my kids are teenagers, so they've been able to engage through this virtual platform. They don't love it, but they're managing. But you take like a first or second grader and sit them behind a Zoom screen all day, they need the socialization, they need movement. So, and again, you have to look at your local virus circulation and who lives with you at home. You know, if you live in a multi-generational home and you have a big, tight school, because like the air standards in schools, meaning like, can you open the windows? Can you get good airflow? That's going to vary from school to school. You know, if you have a big open school, a lot of windows, you can space kids out, like maybe a rural school, that's going to be so different than like a really tight school in New York City that has like a window air conditioning unit. Trying to figure it out then. So get informed and just feel good about your decision. Don't let someone else pressure you make a decision. So, but get good information, talk to friends about, what your fears are, and make sure that fear is a rational fear. But a lot of the states now are making that decision easy for people because they're shutting schools. But my state right now is one of, I'm not sure how many, maybe half the states now are trying to go back, give the option of in-person school, in some shape or form, whether it's staggered, spread out. So if I had a second grader right now where I live, I would let them go to school where I live.
Yeah, it definitely probably depends. Yeah. I know we have to wrap up soon, but I am curious to know, like, if someone does feel like, what are some symptoms they should look out for? What are the most common or uncommon? And then just knowing that, like, I feel like supplement companies and home remedies, like, people are trying to help, like, fight it off or to heal. Like, what would you say to things like, even basic things, like I think of like elderberry syrup, right? Like some basic things that people use to help when they feel like they're getting sick, and now they go for an immune boosting supplement, or vitamin C or zinc. Like, I know some of them are supportive with science, and then some maybe not so much. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, there's treatment of severe illness. So, I mean, there's a little bit of efficacy in otherwise severe sepsis with high-dose vitamin C. Then there's other studies showing maybe not. There's probably no downside to that. So that's treatment. And as far as supplements for the general population, so supplements are things that you need to add if you can't get it in a normal, healthy diet of real food. So if you are a vegan or vegetarian, you have difficulty with iron and B12. So if that's your eating pattern, then you probably do need to supplement some of those things. If you're eating really a whole food diet, including animal products and vegetables, eggs are just magical. There's nothing really you're missing in that. So you don't need to supplement. Now, vitamin D is another story. So vitamin D really is more of a hormone, which is converted by the sun in our skin. So I think if you live north and you have mostly indoor work, it's probably a good idea to get a vitamin D level, because you could just put it into your PubMed or your Google Scholar, vitamin D and COVID. The low vitamin D status is associated with worse outcomes. We don't know if it's causative or just other things travel with that. So again, that's probably a good baseline, because that is something that, if you're low, you might need supplementation. But if you're fine on vitamin D, say you live in Florida and you have an outdoor lifeguard job, you're probably just fine in your vitamin D. It only takes about 10 minutes of direct sunlight midday to get about 5,000 international units of vitamin D. But a lot of us don't get that because we're inside all day. We have desk jobs. Might get up early in the morning to run. That's my life. I get up early to run. So I'm not out in direct sunlight in the day. So I do take a vitamin D supplement just for maintenance.
Okay, so there's nothing to support things like elderberry syrup or
nothing that's in the mainline medical literature. Is there any downside to that stuff? Really, no, because that's, again, like, there's no harm to that other than it's going to cost you some money. So extra zinc, vitamin C packets, there's probably isn't any real downside to that, as long as you don't like massively overdose on the stuff.
Yeah.
But the best plan is just, eat real food, and human diet really includes animal products, because that is your full, complete, high quality proteins, meaning the full spectrum of amino acid is something like an egg, super high quality protein. The fat soluble vitamins, so getting fat with all the vegetables, good vegetables travel with fat, right? That's how we absorb these nutrients, micronutrients better, put olive oil on your salad.
Yeah.
Good. Or your meals always contain, some type of protein, fat with, the carbohydrate food, if you have it, which should be a non-starchy vegetable.
So I guess we'll wrap up, but I like to tell people, I always say, look, we survived the Middle Ages, a plague, multiple world wars, potential nuclear, disaster, we've been through a lot, as a species. Do you have any words of optimism that people that, that are stressed and are living in fear right now?
Yeah, my optimism is I would hope that this is going to be a huge shot of awareness to our poor metabolic health as a nation. So if we're going to prepare for the marathon here, which we're in the middle of, first 2 miles, and the next one, right, there's going to be another one. the UK is, because look at what Boris Johnson is doing right now. So he's like all out frontal assault on sugar because he's the prime minister. He ended up in the ICU. And so he's like, okay, we got to go after obesity in this country, right? It's just like preparation, so that's what we need to focus on now, because we could wait for a vaccine, but that's probably not going to be the holy grail we all are hoping it will be. And then there's going to be another coronavirus or another influenza virus. There's going to be something else which is going to circulate. And again, hit those. The more our population is unhealthy, the more it becomes a national pandemic, or pandemic's international, but just a crisis. So if we had a completely uber well society right now, we wouldn't be having this conversation about coronavirus. It would just be like anything else that's going through, yes, some people get sick, but we're not locking down society. We're not losing jobs, about it. Kids aren't like staying at home. Things circulate all the time, but this wouldn't be something that's a huge outlier in our national response to it. Get healthy. And that's not difficult.
Yeah. Well, that's great. So we'd love to have you back on at some point to talk running, to talk metabolic health. This was a great chat. Where can people find you if people want to read more of your stuff, or are you on social media? Do you have a website? Like, where's the best place for people to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I have a website called Dr. Mark's Desk, and that can link to my book also. I have a lot of resources on my book's website, a lot of movement stuff, a lot of running videos, training videos. That's called runforyourlifebook.com. If you live near West Virginia, I have a store, Two Rivers Treads. We teach a lot of biomechanics movement in the store, so it's a good place to visit. So yeah, Dr. Mark's Desk will link to all those things.
Awesome.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Cucuzella, for coming on. It's been great, really great information. And definitely you are welcome back on the Gym Wits anytime.
Pick another one of those topics.
Yeah, there's plenty of them.
Awesome. All right, well, great to have you on. We'll talk to you soon.
So yeah, it was an interesting interview. I think there was one detail that Tony and me a little bit took issue to, and it's that he spoke a lot about obesity and getting COVID, and two things. First off, that it might have been a little confusing. He never said that being obese will lead to you getting COVID, although it might have sounded like that. Just to clear that up, what I think he was talking a lot about, that if you get COVID and you are obese, that you have a better chance of having serious symptoms.
Yeah. Well, so
you want to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, so again, a little inside baseball. This podcast being released has been a nightmare. We've recorded intro and outro to this multiple times. We lost stuff. So obviously you have not heard Tony on the intro and outro. That's because Tony is not here today, and we had recorded it already. It disappeared into the ether. But I think, so Tony's issue, which again, I think is more of maybe a bit of a miscommunication. I think there were a couple of areas which we didn't have enough time to really address with the doctor, but I think it was more just like not aligning, and I hopefully I can kind of bridge that gap a little bit. So I think there was one thing that we were talking a little bit about is just like kind of the low carb and no carb, and I think that her philosophically, I think is against the idea of like kind of sticking to the no carb diet or very low carb diets, which is something he was talking about, that not unrelated to COVID largely, but that's more of like, I mean, like
we spoke about that
in the science, but we've talked about that as you hate that I say ad nauseum, and you can listen to any of our other podcasts to get that. So I think that's more of like, there are some people who it works well for it. There are other people who it doesn't. I'm always of the side of, and I think Tony would agree, is if you're going to, change your eating habits or quote unquote diet, that it should be something sustainable. And so generally, like, a low carb thing is not long-term sustainable, which is where it presents the challenge. Now, for some people it is, but I'd say for most people it isn't. But it's not to say whether one is right or one is wrong, or there's not science to back anything up. I think the second area, which was more about the weight connecting to, kind of how you're, basically that losing weight can potentially help you, have better outcomes when it comes to COVID. And in this area, I think I agree, definitely agree with Dr. Dr. Cucuzella, and just in that this kind of statistics bear it out. So I think Tony had a little bit of an issue with, that if you're overweight, you're more likely to deal, go to be hospitalized, mortality goes up. And I think in this case, it's not in a situation of kind of shaming people who are overweight, but it's just like the stats are, if you're obese, that is a very, that is one of the things that we're looking at as far as, whether or not you're going to, what your mortality levels, hospitalization levels. And so, at the end of the day, like, you just look at the stats, he's right. If you're, age plays a role, obviously there, if you're immunocompromised, it plays a role, and weight can play a role too. So, we always kind of have to be careful, because we don't want to, you don't want to shame people for being overweight, and you don't want to put it in that way. And so I think that was where there's just a bit of a disconnect. But it's like I think it's one of the things that, yeah, if you're obese, you are potentially going to have to dealing with other issues, where, it's like anything. You do what you can to try to stay healthier, and to have a lot of people say, exercise obviously helps with the immune system. Eating healthy is going to help. Taking good care of yourself, obviously practicing, proper social distancing, where, you don't want to get it. But if you do, there are some steps you can take to try to help mitigate that. We're all kind of in this together and doing what we can. So, like I said, I don't think it sucks to have to speak for her, but we want to get this podcast out. And I think that was
Tony
like
was just, I think that an issue that Tony had was that he might have come off sounding like, if you are obese and you are 100% not healthy, and there are people that are overweight, that are obese, that are healthy.
Yeah,
just because you are obese doesn't mean you are unhealthy.
I disagree. Okay, so I would only say I never got that feeling that he was saying that.
Okay,
because you're right. Like, we know that you're not necessarily, quote, unhealthy, if you're overweight. But but it's still, it is it's a risk factor. Like, if you're, if we're looking at, symptom, dealing with COVID, like, if you're obese, like, it is, it's a factor. And so, we don't want to hide that, for the sake of being kind of politically correct, at the end of the day. So, like I said, I think, but I didn't get that feeling. But again, that's just my opinion. I
okay.
Could have, if there are a million ways to read what someone says, and especially when you're talking about something as broad, like we're saying a lot in a short period of time. So it's easy for things to get misconstrued. But yeah, I didn't get that feeling that he was like, yeah, like anybody that's overweight is unhealthy. No, that's obviously not the case. Plenty of people who maybe are, look, I'm quote overweight if you just look at BMI. Like, so, just, it doesn't, yeah. So I don't know. So I just wanted to make, it did a patchwork job of trying to recreate some of the discussion we had in the outro before it got deleted multiple times. But I guess that is it. As usual, you can find all of our stuff at thegymwits.com, social media, or Facebook, Instagram, all that good stuff there. Rate us if you haven't on Apple Podcasts. And that's it. I'm Ryan George.
I'm Justin Guild, aka Chef Sonic, reminding you that truth does not sell.
And we are the Gym Wits.